Andrew Venice parked himself in the booth right behind the four of them, wondering how much of this place he could be expense account. Figured almost nothing, and when the waiter in tight black pants and a black turtleneck came by, he only ordered an orange juice. Hell, even if he'd been off duty, he figured there was no way he'd be able to buy booze in this joint, with its wood paneling and dim lighting and fancy a wine list, to say nothing of the clientele that ran in higher circles than I.
I'd love a bite of your sandwich.
But he was working and knew he needed every ounce of his detection skills to listen through all the background noise in the nightclub. It was just nice to be in out of the Atlanta heat, overbearing even at this time of the evening. All four had already met by the time he'd managed to slip in, but he had to go about it easy and careful to make sure that none of them made him. Lucky that the booth he was in had opened up, and that the people leaving had unwittingly given him cover. He'd even had a chance to risk a peek over the edge, as he'd sat down, noted who was sitting where. On the opposite side, furthest away from Andrew, sat Isaac Stevens, father of Irene Stevens. He had a salt and pepper beard and hair that was cropped close to his head. About 50 years old. Next to him was Arthur Nance, that doctor, about the same age as Stevens. He was well built, quite trim and muscular and athletic, with sandy brown hair and a thin moustache. Beside Nance sat Rory Edwards, also very well built. Andrew remembered that Edwards was 60, but there was no way in hell he looked to be over Andrew's own age of 40, aside from maybe his fashionable glasses that lent an air of respectability and intelligence to what at first appeared to be a middle-aged jock. Finally, closest to Andrew sat Richard Isaacs, a 66-year-old who did well, Andrew knew, manipulating stocks. Andrew knew this because the ruddy-faced but well-built man was also a police informant, which kept him in the game while eliminating many of his worst opponents. Edwards cleared his throat shortly after the waiter brought over their drinks and said, "A toast!" The other three men mumbled in agreement. "To my old friend Henry Archer. May he rest in peace." All four leaned into the center of the table and clinked their wine glasses together, then drank to his memory.
"Wish I'd known him as well as you,"
said Stevens. "Being good friends with a millionaire industrialist is always a good career move, Isaac," said Nance. He took another swig of his wine, and then smiled to show that he was just joking. The other three men laughed, although it took Stevens a beat longer to find the humor than the others. Isaac shook his head then, looking a little lost in thought. "It's a son of a bitch dying in a car crash like that. Guy's only 60, got a young, beautiful wife in Cali, in better goddamn shape than any of us here."
"The guy was once a champion bodybuilder, Richard," said Stevens. "Not like a Mr. World or anything like that, but he had those muscles and he knew how to carry them. Of course he was in better shape than any of us here. Hell, I do well enough with racquetball at the racket club and polo at the polo club, but I could never hope to be cut like he was. Shit, even my daughter Irene told me she admired his baldy." The others laughed at this, and Nance hooted. Stevens reached over and jokingly slapped him across the top of the head. Rubbing his head in mock pain, Nance leaned back after setting his glass back down on the table. "I was working that day at the hospital when they brought him in, you know." Isaacs drained his glass and signaled for another, then leaned forward, interested. "Do tell," he said. Nance shrugged. "Bruce Lucent was there, recovering from his own car accident. Word got up to me somehow. I'm not sure if someone told because he was so famous and so rich, or if maybe someone knew that he and I knew each other." He paused and finished his wine, then also waved at the waiter. Not that it was needed, since they were well known in the club, and the waiter was already sashaying over with a tray carrying 4 more of the same. By the time I got down to the ER, the cops were there, and Kelly too, and they weren't letting me in to see him, even though I am a doctor. He frowned at the memory of this, felt a small piece of rage break through his normally implacable surface as he thought about the insult of such treatment. But then he remembered where he was, and the fact that they were there to honor the memory of their friend, and he choked it back down.
followed its bitter taste with the tannins and fruits of his favorite dry red, an expensive Richburg 1987, kept in stock exclusively for him.
I've heard rumors that a cop is stalking this case,
growled Edwards. Isaacs, the police informer, sprayed some of his drink, choking, as did Venice, still listening from the other side. He wiped up the orange juice with the sleeve of his jacket, but the men on the other side had not heard them. They were laughing so hard at the mess that Isaacs had made. Where? Isaacs tried to catch his breath. Where did you hear that? Edwards arched an eyebrow, the long, untrimmed and wild hairs below his forehead counterpointing the motion. Let's just say that word gets around. He cracked his knuckles slowly and extravagantly. Sounds to me like he's been calling into question the very life that Henry lived. Don't know what I'd do if he came to me, casting aspersions on my old dear friend. Luckily, over in the other booth, Venice had set down his orange juice, because otherwise he would have ended up spitting more across the table, or else choked on it. And considering how expensive a lousy, well, not lousy really, since it was freshly squeezed just for him, orange juice was in the place, the thought of wasting any more almost brought tears to his eyes. But still, hearing a potential threat against him caused a reaction that normally would have been humor, but based on how in shape all of these guys was, had him worried. They could work him over pretty good with or without a racket or polo mallet. Of course, he had the law on his side, but these guys moved in circles with all the big-time judges. Any case would be a toss-up. I hear that Henry was into something nasty, said Nance. Venice's ears perked up like tiny, distant early warning line radar stations at the sound of this. Edwards grunted. You hear lots of stuff, I'm sure, he said. That doesn't mean any of it is true. He shrugged his massive shoulders. Besides, anybody with as much moolah as he had, he didn't need to stick his hands into the muck. He'd just pay some lackey or toady to do his work for him. Or maybe some shale companies to keep the traces off of him and let him make a few extra tax-free simoleons, answered Stevens. So then, maybe this cop is on to something, replied Nance, except that maybe he's investigating someone else, somebody who knew about any extracurricular stuff Archer was into. He raised his eyebrows, a motion that created a quilt of thick wrinkles on his otherwise normally smooth forehead. Then he leaned forward and whispered, quiet enough so that Venice could only make out a few words. Maybe murder other him. Whatever had been said, it drained what little atmosphere remained at the table, left it cold and thin like the roof of Mount Everest, and the four-man fit as they were no mountain climbers. And so they all drained their drinks, paid the tab, and left. After a suitable interval, Venice got up and followed them, making sure he downed the rest of his fancy schmancy orange juice first. Georgia on my mind. Particularly observant viewers may have noticed that this is not the original version of Atlantanites Chapter 30, nor is it the original remake version. This is a remake version because I was re-uploading everything and I was storing it on an external hard drive, and then the hard drive broke and data recovery failed. So the short version is never buy any products from the company called Seagate. They are shitty and unreliable. Luckily, there aren't that many chapters left of Atlantanites that were not re-uploaded in time. So I will be making these for the third time. And I'm afraid, as of now, the re-uploads will stop. Everything else that I had on hand is lost forever. Fuck Seagate. However, huge support, as always. Huge thanks to my amazing Patreon people, particularly Michael Fattori, Zanazira, and Break System BSE for making all of this reconstruction possible. So thank you for joining me on hopefully one last trip to Atlanta together, and thank you for being you.